I bought a quiet vineyard in Italy after retiring early. My daughter, who once told me I was a failure and blocked me, suddenly emailed saying her whole family was ready to move in and help run the estate. I replied with 2 words: access denied. What happened next was rather unbelievable. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Andrea Powell from England. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. When I bought the vineyard, I wasn't searching for a fresh start. I was looking for a place to go quiet. There's a difference. Fresh starts come with hope, with the belief that something better is waiting. Quiet is just the absence of noise, of people, of expectations, of the kind of love that always came with a price tag in my life. I'd spent 34 years designing buildings that kissed the sky, but slept alone most nights in a cold apartment that felt like a showroom. My marriage had folded in on itself like damp cardboard, soggy, useless, inevitable. And my daughter, Elena, well, she had made her feelings crystal clear during one final phone call I never stopped replaying. You're a failure, and I'm done pretending otherwise. After that, she blocked my number. No warning, no farewell, just silence. 5 years passed before I heard from her again, and by then, I had already traded the skyline for silence, concrete for grapevines, and ambition for olive trees that didn't demand anything from me. Not even love. The vineyard sits on a sloped ridge in Umbria, kissed by the morning sun and wrapped in the kind of air that makes you breathe deeper without realizing it. I didn't even know I needed that kind of air until I got here. There's a little stone house at the edge of the vines, modest, with ivy crawling up one side and a terracotta roof that creaks when it rains. The estate had been neglected by its previous owner, an elderly widow who passed away without heirs. The vines were overgrown, the cellar damp, the walls bruised with time. But I didn't flinch. In fact, I liked that it was broken. It mirrored something in me, something that had finally stopped trying to be pristine. I spent the first year here doing everything myself. Pruning, digging, painting, repairing. I learned the rhythms of the land. I learned to be content with meals eaten alone and evenings spent with nothing but the hum of cicadas and a glass of Chianti I'd earned with my own hands. No one visited. No one called. And for once, that didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like control. What people don't understand is that grief doesn't always come with a death. Sometimes it comes when someone you love decides you're no longer worthy of their time. When Elena blocked me, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I stared at my phone until the screen went dark and then turned it off for 2 days. She was my only child. I raised her through night shifts, single-handedly paid for her private education, her braces, her first car. I attended every school play, every parent-teacher conference. I once drove 6 hours in a snowstorm to bring her a winter coat she forgot when she moved to college. But none of that mattered when I couldn't afford to help her with a down payment on a house at 30. You've never been reliable, she had said. Just successful on paper. I remember hanging up and staring at the walls, wondering if I had dreamed the decades before that moment. Wondering if I ever actually knew her at all. There's a particular ache that settles in when you realize the person you loved most sees you as disposable. It's not anger at first, it's confusion. You comb through every memory, every Christmas morning, every time you carried her fevered body to the ER, trying to spot the crack. Where did it start? When did it all become so conditional? But answers don't come, only more silence. After a while, you stop asking. You stop looking. You build a new life around the hollow. That's what the vineyard became, a monument to what I had left behind, and a sanctuary from the questions I couldn't afford to keep asking. I told myself I was fine, that I had made peace, that her absence was just a symptom of growth, of independence. But in truth, I thought of her every damn day. I just stopped saying her name out loud. So when her name appeared in my inbox, Elena Rossi, my hands didn't move at first. I stared at it like it might vanish. Like it might be some cruel trick played by my aging imagination. But it was real. The subject line was breezy, almost cheerful, exciting news. I clicked. It opened to a wall of words I couldn't unsee. She was writing to tell me that her family, her husband, her 3 children, 2 of whom I had never met, were finally ready to take a leap and help me manage the vineyard. She used phrases like family legacy and bonding opportunity. Not once did she mention our 5 years of silence. Not once did she apologize or acknowledge her cruelty. It was as if our rupture had never happened. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I even wanted help. She just assumed I'd say yes, that I'd be grateful, that her return was a gift, not an intrusion. I closed the email. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I poured myself a drink and sat on the terrace, listening to the wind rush through the vines like it had something urgent to say. It took me a full day to respond. I wrote and deleted a dozen different replies. Some were angry. Some were desperate. Some tried to make her understand what she had done to me. But none of them felt right, because I didn't need her to understand anymore. I didn't need her permission to feel betrayed. I had already buried that grief under 100 acres of grapes and soil. I didn't need closure. I needed space. So I finally typed 2 words. 2 words that made my chest rise and fall like I'd just surfaced from underwater. Access denied. I hit send. Then I shut the laptop and went to tend to the Merlot vines, fingers steady, heart thrumming like it was remembering how to beat for itself again. I didn't expect a reply, not right away. I imagined she'd be stunned into silence, that maybe the finality of those 2 words would force her to look inward, to confront the version of herself she'd conveniently ignored all these years. But less than 48 hours later, she called. The number came up as no caller ID, and I only answered because, for a split second, I thought it might be one of the local contractors about the collapsed retaining wall near the olive grove. Instead, her voice came through the line like a gust of hot wind, sharp, urgent, and already loaded with accusation. "So that's it?" she snapped before I could say a word. "That's all you have to say to me after everything?" I didn't answer right away. I just stood in the middle of my kitchen, staring out the window at the dirt path that snaked between the vines, the silence on my end dragging out long enough to unsettle her. "Are you serious, Dad?" she pressed, her tone climbing. "You're really going to be this petty? After all this time?" That's when I spoke, calm, clipped, deliberate. "You blocked me for 5 years, Elena. 5 years. And now you want to move your entire family into my home like nothing happened." She scoffed so hard it sounded like a bark. "Oh my God, you're such a victim," she said, and in that moment I knew. Nothing had changed. Not one damn thing. The thing about Elena is that she's always been good at rewriting history. She inherited that from her mother, though she'd never admit it. Everything that didn't fit her version of events got edited out. Every sacrifice I made, every moment I swallowed my own pride to keep the peace. She launched into a tirade about how I had shut her out after the divorce, how I had checked out emotionally, and how she needed space to protect her own mental health. I let her talk. I let her pile excuse on top of excuse like a tower made of kindling. Then, when she finally paused to breathe, I said the one thing I'd never said before. "You told me I was a failure," I reminded her. "Do you remember that? Or have you decided that never happened either?" The silence on the other end was sudden and loud. It crackled like tension itself had a sound. "That was a long time ago," she muttered finally. "People say things they don't mean." I almost laughed. "You didn't just say it. You meant it enough to never speak to me again." And then the fire came roaring back. "This is why I never called," she snapped. "You twist everything. You make everything about you. I'm trying to reconnect, and you're acting like a child." But I wasn't acting. I was choosing. There's a difference. After the call, I stood there for a long time, holding my phone like it still might burn me. I felt, not angry exactly, more like a mixture of disbelief and quiet sadness. I had hoped, naively, maybe, that time might have softened her. That 5 years would be enough for humility to grow in the cracks of her ego. But no, time had only given her room to justify herself. She hadn't reached out because she missed me. She reached out because she saw an opportunity. The vineyard, the estate, the romantic idea of coming home, without ever earning her way back in. I knew that if I let her through the gate, she'd bring all her old resentment with her, dressed up as help, cloaked in obligation. She wouldn't ask. She'd expect. And worse. She'd teach her children that I was just some grumpy old man with land they were entitled to. I had already failed once by letting her treat me like a stepping stone. I wouldn't fail again by becoming a doormat. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through the rows of vines in the dark, a flashlight in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. I stopped halfway up the hill, where the moon lit the leaves like stained glass, and I let myself feel everything. The shame, the disappointment, the dull ache of wanting to be loved on someone else's terms. It wasn't just her voice in my head. It was the echo of every compromise I made for people who never saw me clearly. My ex-wife, who mocked my passion projects and belittled my early retirement. My former colleagues, who praised my architecture but never invited me to the table when decisions were made. And Elena, my daughter, who once clung to my arm on her first day of school and later, as a grown woman, cut me out like a cancer. I realized something then. I had spent most of my life giving everything I had, and the moment I stopped, I became disposable. That was their story, but I didn't have to make it mine. The next morning, I opened my inbox to another message. This time, it was shorter. A single paragraph. You're being cruel. You've changed. You used to care. No greeting. No sign-off. Just venom, lightly veiled in guilt. I read it once, then deleted it. No reply. Not because I was angry, but because I had said all I needed to say. Access denied wasn't just a message. It was a decision. A boundary. A reminder that love, without accountability, is just manipulation in prettier packaging. I made coffee, fed the cat that had started showing up near the back door, and went about my day. It felt strange, both hollow and full at the same time. Like morning and freedom had arrived together, arms linked, offering no explanation. By late afternoon, I was back among the vines, pruning the Sangiovese rose, when Luca showed up. He was the neighbor's son, mid-20s, strong, quiet, reliable in a way that felt unusual for his age. He'd been helping me part-time since the spring, and though we didn't talk much, I trusted him. That day, he must have noticed something off. "Bad call?" he asked, nodding toward my phone lying on the wall near the tool shed. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "My daughter wants to move in. With her family." He gave a low whistle. "After all this time?" I nodded. He didn't pry, just leaned against the stone wall and said, "My father cut ties with his brother 10 years ago. Over less. Some people think blood means loyalty, but sometimes blood's just coincidence." I looked at him then, really looked, and realized he wasn't just talking about his family. He was giving me permission to stop justifying mine. The following morning, I woke to 3 missed calls and a new email with the subject line, "You're being unfair." I didn't open it right away. I stared at the subject like it might explode. The audacity of it, unfair. As if years of silence, of being discarded like an expired appliance, had somehow evened out because now she was ready to play daughter again. It was always the same with Elena. Timing was everything, and hers was convenient. She reached out when she was ready. Never mind the years I waited, the birthdays I spent staring at old photos, the holidays I sat alone while she posted pictures of her picture-perfect family on social media. Not once did she acknowledge me, tag me, or even message me to say I'm thinking of you. I wasn't a father. I was a ghost, and now suddenly, I was land. I was inheritance. I was an asset to be absorbed under the banner of family unity. So no, I didn't rush to read her email. I made coffee, stepped outside, and walked the perimeter of the vineyard like I always did. The air was crisp, dry with the scent of soil and fermenting grapes, and for a moment, I could almost forget what waited in my inbox. Almost. But by mid-morning, the weight of it was too much. I opened the message and read. It was longer than the last, more emotionally charged, but not in the way that signals vulnerability. No, this was manipulation dressed in concern. She wrote that I was isolating myself to the point of paranoia, that I was letting bitterness destroy any chance of reconciliation. She spoke as if I were sick, deluded, incapable of seeing how lucky I was to have family willing to come and share the load. She framed her sudden reappearance not as an intrusion, but as an act of mercy. "The kids deserve to know their grandfather," she wrote. "This place should be filled with laughter and love, not left to rot in your bitterness." I read it twice, and the second time, I noticed the phrasing, Your bitterness, not our history. Not once did she say sorry. Not once did she acknowledge her words, the ones that gutted me years ago. I had forgiven myself for being human. She hadn't forgiven me for not being useful. I deleted the email without responding. I needed to walk. I left my phone behind and took to the back trails behind the vineyard, where the land dipped into a wooded ravine. The trees there were older, gnarled with age, their trunks split in places where lightning had once struck or time had taken its toll. I stopped at the foot of the largest one and sat down, letting the silence settle into my bones. I thought about what it meant to be a parent, how much of yourself you give without asking anything in return, how you shrink parts of yourself to make room for someone else's dreams. I remembered the times I'd stayed up late drawing house plans while Elena slept in the next room, the way I used to tiptoe around so I wouldn't wake her. I remembered showing up at her dance recitals, the way her eyes used to light up when she spotted me in the crowd. And I remembered the last thing she ever said to me before she disappeared from my life. You were never there when it counted. That line had lived in my chest like shrapnel. I had played it back 1,000 times, always trying to see what I missed. But now I saw it clearly. It was never about me being absent. It was about me no longer serving a purpose. By the time I returned home, the sun was dipping low and casting long shadows across the vineyard. The answering machine light blinked red. She had left a message. I sat down, poured a glass of wine, and pressed play. Her voice came through thick with performative grief. Dad, I don't know what's happened to you. You were never like this. She paused, probably expecting I'd be moved by the word dad. I know we've had our differences, but I'm reaching out now. I'm trying. You don't get to keep punishing me for the past. That last sentence sent a chill through me. She truly believed that my boundary was punishment. She saw my silence as cruelty, not as a response to hers. If you want to keep living in your fantasy of solitude, fine, she said. But don't expect us to wait around forever. This is your chance. And then the line went dead. I sat there staring at the machine, her words echoing in the room like smoke that refused to leave. Your chance. As if redemption was mine to beg for. That night, I called Luca. I didn't plan to, but something in me needed to hear someone else's voice, someone whose loyalty wasn't tied to obligation. He picked up on the second ring, and I asked if he wanted to come by for dinner. He brought pasta, and I opened a bottle of the Barbera I'd been saving. Over plates of Cacio e Pepe, I told him everything. Not in the abstract way I had before, but the raw version, the years of tension, the final call, the years of silence, and now this sudden avalanche of performative concern. He listened without interrupting, chewing slowly, nodding at the right moments. When I finished, he set down his fork and leaned back. You don't owe her a damn thing, he said. You offered her your whole heart once. She spat on it. Now she wants to collect on what's left because she sees value again. That's not family. That's extraction. His words hit hard. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. And hearing someone else say it made me feel less like a villain and more like a man who finally learned to close the gates after too many invasions. I slept better that night. Not because I felt victorious, but because I felt clear. The fog of guilt was lifting, and in its place came something firmer. Not rage, not even sadness, just resolve. The vineyard was mine, not just legally, but spiritually. I built this place out of brokenness, out of grief that no one else stayed to witness. I watered the soil with silence and tended the vines with hands that had been rejected but not ruined. And no matter how many sweetly packaged guilt trips came knocking, I wasn't going to hand it over to someone who had walked away from the man but now wanted the fruit of his healing. The letter arrived 3 days later, tucked inside a plain white envelope with my name written in tight, careful cursive. No return address. No markings. It was odd, out of place in a life that had become almost monastically simple. I rarely got mail that wasn't a bill or a seasonal newsletter from the local growers cooperative. My first instinct was to toss it into the kitchen drawer where I kept menus and old receipts. But something in the way my name was written gave me pause. Formal, distant, not Elena's handwriting. When I slit the envelope open with the edge of a wine cork knife, the paper unfolded with a strange, practiced smoothness. That's when I saw the signature. Marco, Elena's husband. A man I had met only a handful of times, each interaction brief and polite in a way that always felt slightly performative. The kind of man who shook your hand firmly and smiled without showing teeth. A man who once told me, "We'll take good care of her," like she was a fragile object I had somehow damaged. I should have known then that our relationship would become one of transaction, not trust. The letter was short but calculated. He opened with pleasantries, as though we were old friends instead of two men with years of strained silence between us. He spoke of his respect for me, his admiration for what I'd built from the ruins of early retirement, and his hope that we could put the past behind us in the name of family. He wrote about Elena with a tone that tried to bridge guilt and diplomacy, suggesting that she had matured, that motherhood had humbled her, and that she now saw the importance of legacy. I hated that word, legacy. It's what people say when they're eyeing the land under your feet, not the life you've lived on it. Then he got to the real point. He proposed they move in, not just to help, but to take over the operational side of the vineyard so I could focus on enjoying the fruits of my labor. He framed it like a gift, like they were rescuing me from solitude. I read the letter twice. The second time, slower. Not once did he mention reconciliation. Not once did he ask how I felt. Like Elena, he didn't apologize for the years of absence. He simply rewrote history to make room for their arrival. I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was no answer that wouldn't cost me something I wasn't willing to give. Instead, I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of the ledger I kept for the vineyard's accounts. Not out of sentiment, but as evidence, proof that what I suspected was true. This wasn't about mending a broken bond. It was about claiming what they believed was theirs by default. I sat on the terrace with a glass of my latest vintage, letting the bitterness of it settle on my tongue. It tasted of plum and ash, like something once sweet that had spent too much time fermenting in a sealed space. And that was what they wanted, access to the product, not the process. They didn't want to understand what it had taken to survive here. They wanted to inherit the harvest without knowing the labor. Later that afternoon, Luca arrived to help me with the storage barrels in the lower cellar. We worked in silence for a while, the air damp with the scent of wood and old wine. At one point, he caught me staring off, and without prompting, asked, "You all right?" I handed him a wrench and said, "Elena's husband wrote to me." He stopped mid-turn, his brows knitting together. "Let me guess, he's the nice guy version of her." I chuckled, more bitter than amused. He offered to take the vineyard off my hands so I can relax. Lucas shook his head. "It's always the ones who disappear that think they've earned a place at the table just because they show up again." He was right. Showing up was not the same as showing up consistently. And consistency had never been part of Elena's vocabulary once I stopped fitting into her version of success. That night, I pulled out the old photo album I hadn't opened in years. It was tucked in a drawer beneath some winter scarves, heavy with dust and neglect. I didn't know why I opened it. Maybe I wanted to remind myself that there was a time when she loved me without condition. Maybe I needed to remember my own face in those moments, when I still believed that love could conquer resentment if only you held on long enough. Page after page, there we were, me holding her in the hospital, her on my shoulders at the county fair, the two of us carving pumpkins on the apartment floor the year her mother moved out. Each photo was a snapshot of a man who would have walked through fire for his daughter. And maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't survive the smoke inhalation. I closed the album halfway through and stared at the ceiling, wondering how something that once felt eternal could become so transactional. The next morning, I composed a reply I never intended to send. Not to Marco, not to Elena, just for myself. I wrote, "This vineyard was built on pain and peace. Every vine, every barrel, every inch of soil carries the weight of what I survived. I didn't come here to be rescued. I came here to be left alone, and I have earned that solitude." I saved the document and closed my laptop. It was enough to have said it. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's a declaration that no longer needs validation. That afternoon, Luca brought his girlfriend, Sophia, to meet me. She was bright-eyed and kind, the type of person who looked you in the eye when you spoke and actually listened. Over a shared meal of grilled vegetables and lentils, she asked questions about the vineyard's history, the soil, the fermentation process. She didn't ask about my family, and for that, I was grateful. At one point, As the sun dipped behind the cypress trees, she looked around and said, "This place has soul. You can feel it." I looked at her then, really looked, and said, "It's the only thing I've ever built that no one could take from me." And in that moment, I knew I wouldn't give an inch. Not to guilt, not to legacy, not to the daughter who wanted the fruit, but not the roots. The final message didn't come through email. It arrived as a voicemail, long, rambling, and spoken in the strained tone of someone trying to sound composed while delivering a veiled ultimatum. I didn't notice it at first. I'd spent the morning cleaning the fermentation tanks and reorganizing the storage shed where I kept the glass bottles. By mid-afternoon, I was covered in dust and sweat, my shirt stuck to my back, my hands stained with tannin and grime. When I finally stepped inside to shower, I saw the blinking red light on the answering machine. Part of me hoped it was the local plumber finally confirming a repair date for the cellar leak. But the moment I pressed play and heard her voice, Elena's voice, thick with forced restraint and brittle sweetness, I knew exactly what was coming. This wasn't a daughter reaching for her father. It was a chess move. One final, desperate play before the game was lost. "Hey, Dad." She hadn't called me that in years. Already I could feel the knot forming in my chest. I wasn't going to call again, but the kids keep asking why they've never met their grandfather. Luca's 11 now, you know. He's old enough to understand rejection. That word, rejection, hit like a slap. She paused as if to let the guilt settle, then continued. "I know we've had our differences. I know you're angry. But you're not just punishing me anymore. You're punishing them. You're missing out on birthdays, school plays, bedtime stories. You're choosing solitude over love." Another pause, another calculated breath. "You said access denied." I heard that loud and clear, but I want you to think about what that means. Not just for me, but for the legacy you're leaving behind. This vineyard could be something we all build together. Or it can die with you. Click. I stood there for a long time, my body still damp from the shower, the towel clinging to my shoulders. The voicemail repeated in my head like a chorus. Not the whole thing, just that one line, "Or it can die with you." It wasn't just dramatic. It was a threat, a final twist of the emotional knife, spoken with the unmistakable entitlement of someone who believed love could be leveraged. What stunned me wasn't the cruelty, it was how familiar it sounded. Like an old echo from her mother's voice, the way she used to turn blame into obligation. That line was never about death. It was about control. Give us what we want, or be remembered as bitter. Withhold access, and we'll turn your peace into your shame. I walked out to the terrace, barefoot, the stone tiles warm from the sun. My eyes drifted over the vines, their heavy clusters almost ready for harvest, and I wondered how many more things I would have to bury before I was finally left alone. For the next hour, I didn't move. I sat in my chair, the voicemail now saved in a file I knew I would never listen to again, and tried to breathe through the guilt clawing at my throat. It was clever, really, using the grandchildren. I had no relationship with them, had never even met the younger two. But now they were shields, leverage, reasons to reopen a door I had closed for my own survival. And maybe, once, that would have worked. There was a time I would have done anything just to hear Elena call me Dad again, without venom in her voice. I would have swallowed pride, shame, even the truth just to be invited back into her life in a way that felt real. But now, that word felt like a costume she'd pulled from the back of the closet, dusty, ill-fitting, worn only for dramatic effect. I wasn't a father in her world. I was a narrative device, a looming ghost to be summoned when it suited her need for legacy, inheritance, or redemption. That evening, Luca found me sitting by the tool shed, polishing the stainless steel shears like I was trying to scrape off more than just rust. "You look like someone buried something," he said as he walked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Maybe I did," I replied. I told him about the voicemail, not all the words, just the core of it. The grandkids, the guilt, the implied threat. He sat beside me on the stone bench, letting the silence stretch before saying anything. "You know what gets me?" he finally said. "She keeps saying we, like you're supposed to believe she suddenly cares about your legacy. But where was she when you were building it? Where was she when you were alone out here pruning vines and sealing barrels?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He already knew. "You don't owe them anything," he added. especially not the parts of you they threw away once already. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, the floors creaking under my bare feet, the air thick with the scent of earth and night blooms. I kept thinking about something I hadn't let myself admit until now. I wasn't just angry at Elena. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had loved someone who saw me as a stepping stone. Ashamed that I had wanted her approval for so long I ignored every sign she'd already written me off. Ashamed that a part of me still flinched every time I heard her voice, as if some ancient part of me still believed she had the right to judge me. But I was done chasing apologies that never came. I was done rewriting myself to fit someone else's version of me. I was done being a footnote in my own life story. At sunrise, I walked out to the far edge of the vineyard, the part near the broken stone wall where wild lavender grew in defiance of the neat rose. I stood there watching the sky turn from indigo to gold, and I made a decision. No more messages. No more explanations. I would not be baited into defending my solitude, not when it was the only thing that had ever truly healed me. I would not build a bridge to someone who only wanted to cross it for their own gain. I had nothing to offer her now except the boundaries she refused to accept, and I would not apologize for it. The harvest came early that year. The heat had lingered longer into September than usual, pushing the grapes to ripen faster, sugar levels high and acidity just right. It was a strange parallel, the way nature had hurried toward its conclusion, as if it, too, was ready for closure. I woke that morning before the sun, pulling on my boots with the rhythm of someone who had done this for years. And I had. This was my third harvest on the vineyard, and yet this one felt heavier, more personal. Not because of the yield, which looked promising, but because it marked the first season I approached with complete clarity. No lingering hopes. No private yearning for a call that might mend what had long ago unraveled. The voicemail sat unsaved now, deleted with finality, and the guilt I once wore like a shroud had dried up and blown away like leaves in the wind. I didn't replay her words anymore, not even in my mind. I replayed mine. The silence. The restraint. The two-word reply that had become my new religion, access denied. Luca arrived with a small crew just after sunrise, a mix of his friends from the next village and Sophia, his girlfriend, who was already carrying baskets before I even greeted her. There was something healing in their presence, young, focused, reverent without being performative. They weren't here for legacy or leverage. They were here for the work. And in that quiet communion between vine and hand, I found something close to grace. We worked until our backs ached, the sun climbing higher, painting everything in gold and dust. Sophia sang softly in Italian as she plucked clusters from the vine, her voice rising above the rustle of leaves. I looked around at the people who chose to be here, not out of obligation or shared blood, but because they respected the land and what it stood for. That, to me, was more family than anything Elena had offered since her reappearance. I didn't need her presence. I didn't need her children's names. I had this: honesty, labor, and the clean satisfaction of knowing every drop of this wine would carry no trace of manipulation. Around midday, I stepped into the cellar to check the oak barrels. The cool air was a relief from the sun, and as I ran my hand along the wood, I thought about the phrase Marco had used in his letter, "Enjoy the fruits of your labor." That had been the bait. The promise of rest, of being taken care of, as if I had earned my peace only by stepping aside. But what none of them understood, what Elena never bothered to ask, was that this was the reward. The labor was the point. The pruning, the crushing, the waiting, the pressing. It wasn't something to retire from. It was something that anchored me. Peace didn't come from letting go of the work. It came from knowing the work was mine and mine alone. I didn't build this vineyard so I could one day hand it off like a burden. I built it because I needed something to believe in after everything else had fallen away. Later that evening, after the baskets were full and the last rows trimmed, I invited the crew to stay for a small dinner. Nothing elaborate, just pasta, bread, and a bottle of last year's reserve. We ate on the terrace under string lights Luca had helped me rig up earlier in the summer, the air thick with lavender and earth and the quiet hum of contentment. No one asked about my daughter. No one tiptoed around the subject. And yet, halfway through the meal, Sophia raised a glass and said, "To the man who made this from scratch, and never gave it to someone who didn't earn it. The table fell silent for a beat before glasses clinked gently, and I felt something uncoil in my chest. Not pride exactly, something softer, something like dignity. After everyone left, I stayed outside alone, watching the moon rise over the ridge. I thought about writing one final email to Elena, not to argue, not to defend, but just to mark the end properly. I didn't want to leave space for interpretation. I wanted clarity, closure. So I sat at my old laptop, the keys slightly sticky from years of dust and vineyard grit, and I typed, Elena, I heard everything you said. I understand your need for legacy and connection. But connection requires respect. It requires effort, not just when it's convenient or strategic, but when it's hard and uncomfortable. You chose silence for years. I chose survival. I will not undo the healing I've found here for the illusion of reconciliation. If you want to teach your children something about family, teach them this. Access to someone's life is a privilege, not a right. Especially when that someone had to build peace from the wreckage you left behind. This vineyard will remain mine, because I've already shared it with the only people who showed up when there was nothing to gain. Goodbye, Dad. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't check to see if it was read. I archived the thread, closed the laptop, and stepped outside one last time before bed. The night was cool, the kind of stillness that only comes when nothing is left to argue. I breathed it in fully, without hesitation. I had not just denied access. I had reclaimed it for myself. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't walking away. It's staying away once the guilt starts knocking. If you've ever had to cut ties with someone who only showed up when there was something to gain, you're not cruel. You're clear. Share your story in the comments. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deeply personal tales about boundaries, betrayal, and hard-earned peace. See you soon in the next story.